Not everyone believes in karma, but after this story, maybe you should. When HOA Karen, who prided herself on knowing every rule in the book, stole my $78,000 boat and claimed it belonged to the Homeowners Association, I did something she never saw coming. I waited patiently. Just 48 hours later, an entire FBI tactical team was raiding her house. Don't worry, I'll tell you exactly what happened. Comment below if you're watching from Florida, where Karens seem to breed as prolifically as alligators. I'm Mike Peterson, a 38-year-old software engineer who works remotely for a tech company in Silicon Valley. After my divorce 3 years ago, I decided I needed a fresh start somewhere peaceful. That's how I ended up buying a beautiful lakefront home in Lakeside Estates, a gated community in Tampa, Florida. The place was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a spacious yard, and best of all, a private dock where I could keep the 24-foot leisure boat I'd always dreamed of owning. I bought the boat a week after moving in, a gleaming white Chaparral with blue trim that cost me $78,000. A significant chunk of my savings, but worth every penny for the weekend relaxation it provided. For the first month, everything was idyllic. I'd spend weekdays coding in my home office and weekends exploring the lake, fishing, or just drifting with a cold beer and a good book. The Florida sunshine was exactly the change I needed after years in the fog and hustle of San Francisco. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, most of them retirees or other professionals who kept to themselves. I was just starting to feel like I'd made the right decision when the tranquility of my new life was shattered by the sound of someone sharply rapping on my front door one Saturday morning. That's when I met Patricia Wilkins, the 54-year-old HOA president, or as everyone in the neighborhood secretly called her, the Karen. Patricia was a widow who worked at a local real estate agency and lived with her 2 yappy Pomeranians 3 houses down from mine. She stood on my doorstep, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head, clipboard in hand, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. From our first encounter, when she stopped by ostensibly to welcome me to the neighborhood, but actually to point out that my mailbox was an unapproved shade of white, I knew we weren't going to be friends. "The mailbox should be eggshell, not bright white," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness while her eyes remained cold as ice. "You'll find the approved color chart in section 6.3 of the HOA guidelines. I'll email you a violation notice as a reminder." And just like that, before I could even respond, she was clicking her way down my driveway in her expensive heels, her blonde bob haircut bouncing with each determined step. I stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, wondering what had just happened. Little did I know this was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war. After that first encounter, the violation notices came like clockwork. My grass was 2.1 inches tall. The limit was 2 inches. My garbage bin was visible from the street on a non-collection day. The trim on my windows needed repainting. The bird feeder in my backyard was unauthorized wildlife encouragement. It was exhausting, but I tried to comply, hoping she'd eventually run out of things to nitpick. I even invited her over for coffee one afternoon, thinking maybe we could find some common ground. Big mistake. She spent the entire time inspecting my home for more violations and left with a gleam in her eye that made me nervous. "You know, Mr. Peterson," she said as she was leaving, pausing at my doorway and looking back over her shoulder, "communities like Lakeside Estates maintain their value because people follow the rules. Some folks move here from other places and think they can just do whatever they want, but that's not how it works here." Her smile was tight and threatening. "I hope you're going to be a team player." The message was clear. Fall in line or face consequences. I tried to brush it off, focusing instead on settling into my new home and enjoying my boat on the weekends. I met some of my other neighbors, including Tom Reynolds, a retired police officer in his 60s who lived next door. Tom was everything Patricia wasn't: laid back, friendly, and genuinely helpful. "Don't let Patricia get to you," he advised one evening as we shared beers on his dock. "She's been making everyone's life miserable since her husband died 5 years ago. It's like she's compensating for something." Tom had a perpetual tan from spending his days fishing and a no-nonsense attitude I found refreshing after dealing with Patricia's passive-aggressive tactics. Things escalated when the HOA held its monthly meeting in the community center, a beige stucco building with an outdated interior that smelled faintly of mothballs and coffee. I attended out of curiosity, wanting to see how these meetings worked, and maybe meet more neighbors. The room was half full, mostly with older residents who seemed resigned to whatever was about to happen. Patricia sat at the front with what was clearly her inner circle, a few sycophants who nodded at everything she said. The atmosphere was tense, like being called to the principal's office. Patricia proposed a new rule. No boats may be docked at private residences for more than 24 hours consecutively. The specificity of the rule wasn't lost on me. I was the only new resident with a boat. When the proposal came up for a vote, I stood up to object, pointing out that private docks were part of our property rights according to the community's original covenant. My voice was shaking slightly. I've never been comfortable with public confrontation, but I wasn't going to lose my boat dock without a fight. I purchased my home specifically because it included a private dock, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. The dock is on my property, and the original covenant clearly states that waterfront homeowners have the right to keep vessels at their private docks. This new rule would effectively nullify what we all paid a premium for. There were a few murmurs of agreement, which gave me courage to continue. Furthermore, the community marina doesn't have enough slips for all residents with boats. Where exactly are we supposed to keep them? Tom backed me up, standing to address the room. This is just another power grab, he said bluntly. Next thing you know, we won't be able to park our cars in our own driveways. I've been here 15 years, and I've watched as more and more of our property rights get chipped away by arbitrary rules. His years as a police officer showed in his commanding presence, and several other neighbors nodded in agreement. Patricia's face flushed with anger, but she maintained her composure. The board is simply trying to maintain the aesthetic standards of our community, she said smoothly. Large boats create an unseemly commercial appearance in our residential paradise. The way she emphasized "our" made it clear she didn't consider me part of the community. And the votes were tallied. Patricia's proposal was defeated 7-6. It was a narrow victory, but a victory nonetheless. I felt a small surge of triumph as Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment before she regained her composure. But as the meeting disbanded, I overheard her whispering to Jenny Thompson, the mousy, nervous-looking HOA secretary, "We'll just have to address this matter differently." Jenny nodded, though she looked uncomfortable. The way Patricia's eyes darted toward me, with barely disguised malice, sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what differently meant until the following morning, when I stepped out onto my back porch, coffee mug in hand, expecting to see my beautiful boat gleaming in the early sunlight. Instead, I discovered my boat dock completely empty, with only the gentle lapping of lake water against the wooden posts, as if nothing had ever been there at all. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. I blinked several times, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The dock was still empty. My beautiful Chaparral, my pride and joy, my weekend escape, was gone. The rope ties hung loose, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. I put down my coffee mug and scrambled down the steps to the water's edge, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran down to the dock, scanning the lake in every direction, but there was no sign of it. Maybe it had come loose somehow and drifted away. But that made no sense. I was meticulous about securing it, double-checking the knots every time. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the police to report a theft. While waiting, I paced along my dock, looking for any sign of forced entry or tampering. There was nothing obvious, just the absence of my $78,000 investment. My mind raced through possibilities. Professional thieves, teenage pranksters, but deep down I already suspected who was behind this. Officer Sarah Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later, a professional-looking woman in her mid-30s with a sympathetic manner. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and the composed demeanor of someone who'd seen it all. She took notes as I described the boat in detail, providing the registration numbers and explaining when I'd last seen it. As she was measuring the distance between my dock cleats, a familiar voice called out from the direction of my driveway, making my blood run cold. "There's no need for the police officer. No crime has been committed here," Patricia announced as she strode toward us, waving a folder full of papers. She was dressed in a crisp linen pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, looking like she was on her way to close a high-end real estate deal. The boat was legally impounded by the HOA for violation of community guidelines. She handed Officer Martinez a document that looked like an official notice. As you can see, the board held an emergency meeting last night and passed Regulation 42B, which prohibits the docking of recreational vehicles exceeding 20 feet at private residences. Mr. Peterson was in clear violation, and as per Section 8 of the HOA bylaws, the association has the right to remove such violations at the owner's expense. She smiled at me with undisguised triumph. Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable as she reviewed the paperwork. She flipped through the pages, frowning slightly, then looked between Patricia and me. I could see the reluctance in her eyes. She knew something wasn't right, but there didn't seem to be a clear criminal element she could act on. I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson, but this appears to be a civil matter, not criminal. The document states the boat has been moved to the community marina. You'll need to resolve this with your HOA or possibly consult an attorney. She gave me an apologetic look before departing, leaving me alone with Patricia. I was seething with anger, but trying to maintain my composure as I demanded to know how she had pulled this off. The vote had failed just last night, after all. Patricia's smile widened as she explained that she had falsified minutes from an old meeting, labeled it as an emergency session to bypass the 72-hour notification requirement, and pushed through the regulation with just her small circle of allies. The way she so casually admitted to falsifying documents made my stomach turn. She clearly had no fear of consequences. Your boat is now community property, she said with smug satisfaction, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if discussing nothing more important than the weather. It will be used for the HOA board retreat next weekend. You can sue me if you want, but I have 30 years of experience in real estate law. Her eyes glittered with malice. By the time your case gets to court, if it ever does, that boat will be long gone. That's how these things work, Mr. Peterson. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there stunned and furious. I immediately called Tom and explained what had happened. He was outraged but not surprised. She's done similar things before, but this is bolder than usual, he said grimly. Let me make some calls. I still have friends in law enforcement who might be able to help. I appreciated his support, but I was beginning to realize I was dealing with someone who had been getting away with this kind of behavior for years. She knew the system and how to manipulate it. Later that day, I drove over to the community marina, a well-maintained facility with about 30 boat slips at the north end of the lake. And there it was, my boat tied up at the main dock. Patricia was showing it off to several other board members, acting as if she had purchased it herself. She was pointing out features, running her hand along the polished hull as if it belonged to her. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I started to approach them, ready to cause a scene, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Jenny Thompson, the HOA secretary, looking nervously over her shoulder, her mousy brown hair falling across her face as she leaned toward me. She does this to all the new people who don't fall in line, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't agree with it, but I can't stop her. I need this job. Her eyes darted around, clearly terrified of being seen talking to me. My husband lost his job last year, and this is our only income right now. I'm sorry. Before I could respond, she hurried away, blending back into the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered to admire the HOA's new boat. That's when I realized Patricia was accustomed to steamrolling over people without consequences. She had built a little fiefdom here and ruled it with an iron fist, while people like Jenny were too afraid to stand up to her. I was determined to get my boat back, but I needed to be smart about it. Direct confrontation clearly wouldn't work. She had too much power in this small community, and too many people either supported her or were too afraid to oppose her. As I walked back to my car, fuming over the injustice, I checked my mailbox and found a letter that had been delivered to my address by mistake. It was from the Internal Revenue Service, addressed to Patricia Wilkins. The envelope was official-looking, with the imposing IRS logo in the corner. That's when the first seed of an idea began to form in my mind. Maybe there was a way to fight back after all, not through confrontation, but through investigation. I'm not normally the type of person who would open someone else's mail, But given the circumstances and the fact that it had been delivered to my mailbox, I made an exception. Sitting at my kitchen table, I carefully opened the envelope, my heart racing slightly at crossing this line. The letter was a notice of audit for Patricia Wilkins, questioning several large deposits to her personal account that didn't align with her reported income. It seemed the IRS had questions about where almost $200,000 in unexplained funds had come from over the past 2 years. The letter mentioned discrepancies and potential penalties in the formal, threatening language that only the IRS can truly master. I carefully resealed the envelope, planning to accidentally deliver it to her myself after making a photocopy for my records. Of course, this wasn't just about my boat anymore. If Patricia was involved in financial impropriety, it might explain her aggressive behavior and abuse of power. People who have something to hide often create smokescreens by attacking others. Before confronting Patricia, I needed more information. I reached out to Tom Reynolds, my retired cop neighbor, and explained the situation over beers on his back porch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lake as fishing boats returned to their docks. "That woman has been terrorizing this community for years," he growled, crushing his empty beer can in his weathered hand. "It's about time someone stood up to her." Tom's face lit up with new purpose. I got the feeling he'd been looking for a way to take Patricia down for a long time. Tom introduced me to his friend Marco Gonzalez, a local accountant who happened to be an old college buddy of mine from a finance class we'd taken together. Marco had aged well, still fit with just touches of gray at his temples, and retained the sharp mind I remembered from our university days. When I told Marco about the suspicious IRS letter in my stolen boat, he offered to help me investigate Patricia's finances. "Financial records leave breadcrumbs," Marco explained as we sat in his modest office downtown. Family photos lined his desk, showing a wife and 2 teenage daughters. "Even the smartest criminals make mistakes with money. If she's hiding something, we'll find it." His confidence was reassuring and his expertise invaluable. Using publicly available information and Tom's old law enforcement contacts, we began to piece together a disturbing pattern. Patricia had been in serious financial trouble after her husband died 5 years ago, nearly facing foreclosure on her house. The mortgage company had actually initiated proceedings, according to county records Tom was able to access. But about 2 years ago, her financial situation mysteriously improved. She paid off her mortgage entirely, a sum of over $300,000, bought a new Mercedes, started wearing expensive jewelry, and took lavish vacations to Europe and the Caribbean that she documented extensively on social media. The timing coincided with her becoming HOA president. "People don't just come into that kind of money out of nowhere," Marco pointed out, showing me a timeline he'd created of Patricia's financial recovery. "Either she won the lottery and didn't report it, or she found another source of income. And given what you've told me about her character, I doubt it's anything legitimate." I also managed to connect with Patricia's daughter, Linda, through social media. She was in her early 30s, living in New York and working in publishing. According to her profile, posing as a real estate agent, researching successful property managers in the area, I sent her a message asking about her mother's business practices. It was deceptive, yes, but I needed information, and Linda seemed to be the only family connection I could find. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, seeming eager to talk about her mother, though not in the way I expected. Linda, who had a strained relationship with Patricia, let slip some interesting information during our exchange. "Mom was always obsessed with appearances, but lately she's been flashing cash like crazy. New car, new jewelry, even offered to help with my student loans, which is weird because she was practically bankrupt after Dad died. I didn't take the money. It didn't feel right somehow." She paused before adding, "Between you and me, I've always wondered if Dad's import business was entirely legitimate. He traveled a lot, especially to South America, and was very secretive about his inventory." This new information about Patricia's late husband added another layer to the mystery. Had he been involved in something illegal, and had Patricia somehow continued the business after his death? I shared this with Tom and Marco, who agreed it was worth exploring further. Marco helped me dig into the HOA's financial records, which were technically available to all residents but buried under so much bureaucratic red tape that nobody bothered to look at them. We had to file formal requests and wait for Jenny to provide copies, which she did nervously, constantly looking over her shoulder as if expecting Patricia to appear at any moment. What we found was shocking. Large sums of money regularly transferred from the HOA Maintenance Fund to shell companies with names like Lakeside Property Services and Florida Coastal Maintenance, companies that didn't seem to actually exist beyond a P.O. box registration. The supposed services provided were vaguely described as landscaping, infrastructure improvements, or community enhancement, but there was little evidence of any actual work being done. These are classic signs of embezzlement, Marco explained, highlighting suspicious transactions in the statements. Money goes out to fake companies, then presumably finds its way back to whoever set up the scheme. He pointed to a pattern of withdrawals that occurred shortly before Patricia's luxury purchases. The timing here is too convenient to be coincidental. The deeper we dug, the clearer the pattern became. Patricia had been using her position as HOA president to confiscate property from new residents who crossed her, then selling those items for personal profit while laundering the money through fake maintenance companies. My boat wasn't the first target. There had been a classic car, an art collection, even a vintage motorcycle, all taken under the guise of HOA violations and then mysteriously disposed of, according to the records. I spent days tracking down former residents who had moved away from lakeside estates under suspicious circumstances. Many were reluctant to talk at first, but once I explained my situation, the stories poured out. A pattern emerged. They would have a run-in with Patricia over some minor violation, then suddenly find themselves targeted with increasingly ridiculous HOA complaints until something valuable was confiscated. Shortly afterward, many would simply give up and move away, selling their homes at below-market rates, often to buyers connected to Patricia in some way. I discovered that Patricia was already arranging to sell my boat to a buyer in Miami for $95,000, a nice profit on my $78,000 investment. She had listed it on an exclusive broker's site using a different registration number. Marco found that Patricia had failed to report over $450,000 in income from selling used items over the past 3 years, according to public tax records he was able to access through his professional channels. I had all the pieces of the puzzle, but not enough hard evidence to press charges against her. It was maddening to know what she was doing but not be able to stop her. I considered going directly to the police with what we'd found, but Tom cautioned me that without rock-solid proof, Patricia might be able to spin it as a personal vendetta. "We need to catch her in the act," he advised, "or find something so damning she can't talk her way out of it." Then Tom called me late one evening, his voice urgent and excited. "Mike, you won't believe what I found in my old files. I was going through some cold cases I kept copies of after retirement. Force of habit, you know. And Patricia's name came up in connection with a ring of high-end antiquity smugglers the FBI was tracking 5 years ago. The case went cold, but her late husband was suspected of being involved in selling stolen art and artifacts through his import business. The FBI might be very interested in what she's up to now." That was the missing piece. This wasn't just about HOA corruption and stolen boats. Patricia might be connected to international art theft. What had started as a neighborly dispute was now potentially a federal case. I felt a surge of adrenaline as Tom and I agreed to take our findings to the FBI. Finally, we might have a way to stop Patricia once and for all. Tom and I met with FBI Special Agent David Chen, who specialized in financial crimes. Despite our evidence, he needed more proof of current illegal activity. "Her connection to the old smuggling case is tenuous without additional evidence," he explained. However, he confirmed they'd been monitoring a smuggler named Rodriguez for years. "If she's connected to the Rodriguez network, this could be significant," Chen said. "If we could document her selling property that doesn't belong to her, especially to known smuggling operations, that would give us grounds to move forward." I wasn't about to let Patricia escape with my boat. I contacted my college friend Ryan Miller in Miami, asking him to pose as a potential buyer willing to pay $100,000 cash for my boat with no paperwork. Ryan agreed immediately. Meanwhile, I secretly installed 2 GPS tracking devices on my boat, one visible, one hidden as backup. Ryan met Patricia at the marina wearing a hidden microphone while I listened from a nearby cafe. The conversation exceeded our expectations. Patricia openly admitted the boat wasn't hers and boasted about using the HOA to appropriate assets from troublesome residents. "I've done this dozens of times," she bragged. "These tech people move down here with their fancy toys, break a few rules, and suddenly find themselves minus a boat or a car. It's all perfectly legal on paper." Then came the bombshell. "I've got a guy named Rodriguez in Miami who handles all my special sales. He deals in high-end boats, cars, art, you name it. Gets them out of the country fast, no questions asked." She even mentioned having a painting her late husband had acquired that might interest Rodriguez. Very exclusive, very rare. Ryan arranged for Patricia to bring both the boat and painting to a private dock the following evening. I immediately forwarded the recording to Agent Chen, who was now fully engaged. "This Rodriguez matches the suspected fence for stolen artwork we've been tracking. Your boat might be key to finally catching him." But Patricia somehow discovered our investigation and escalated her harassment, sending multiple violation notices daily, getting my electricity shut off with false reports, and threatening liens against my property. It became a race against time. The FBI needed days to prepare, but my boat was scheduled to leave Tampa within 24 hours. Patricia discovered my investigation when an HOA board member spotted me photographing financial documents. She immediately called an emergency meeting, accusing me of being a community threat and pushing for severe sanctions. But something unexpected happened. Several neighbors stood up for me, including Tom. Most surprisingly, Jenny Thompson finally found her courage. "I've known about Patricia's illegal activities for years," she confessed to the shocked assembly. "She's been embezzling from the HOA fund through fake companies and selling residents' property for personal profit." Patricia's face contorted with rage as her carefully constructed facade crumbled. Stephen Brooks, her attorney accomplice, quickly intervened, threatening legal action and demanding $100,000 for defamation. Coincidentally, the exact amount Ryan had offered for my boat. The intimidation failed. Too many residents had heard Jenny's confession. The neighborhood was finally waking up to Patricia's reign of terror. Her retaliation grew desperate and criminal. She slashed my car tires, smashed my mailbox, cut power lines, filed false building code violations, and even tried listing my house for sale without authorization. Through my legitimate HOA system access, I discovered Patricia and Stephen preparing fraudulent documents claiming ownership of my home, complete with forged signatures and notary stamps. I informed Agent Chen, but the FBI still needed 48 hours to coordinate their operation. "Rodriguez is the bigger fish," Chen explained. "He's connected to an international smuggling operation, moving stolen artifacts worth millions." That evening, Patricia organized her remaining allies to threaten me with eviction. 5 people stood in my yard shouting threats, led by Stephen, waving legal documents and promising to bury me in litigation. The confrontation ended only when a neighbor called police, who dispersed the group but took no action, calling it a civil dispute. As they drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Boat being prepped for transport to Miami tonight." Adum, he had been keeping an eye on the marina, posing as a potential buyer interested in several boats to avoid suspicion. Attached was a photo of my Chaparral being readied for transport, with a large truck and trailer waiting nearby. This wasn't just about harassment anymore. They were accelerating their plans, probably spooked by the growing opposition in the community. I watched through my window as Patricia's Mercedes pulled up across the street. She sat there, engine running, just watching my house with a triumphant smile. A tow truck arrived at the community marina to move my boat. Just then, my phone vibrated again, a message from Agent Chen. "Don't do anything. We have to delay. Rodriguez disappeared, but just resurfaced. We're tracking him now." My heart sank. The FBI wasn't ready, but Patricia was moving ahead with her plan. If my boat left for Miami tonight, I might never see it again, lost in the labyrinth of international smuggling operations. I had to make a decision, and fast. The sun was setting over the lake, casting long shadows across my front yard as I weighed my options and formulated a plan. I had to make a difficult decision: wait for the FBI and potentially lose my boat forever, or take action myself and risk compromising their investigation. I paced my living room, running my hands through my hair in frustration. The FBI needed more time, but time was the one thing I didn't have. My $78,000 investment, and more importantly now, key evidence in a federal investigation, was about to disappear. I chose a middle path. Using my technical skills, I would create an opportunity that would benefit both the FBI's larger case and my immediate need to prevent my boat from vanishing. I sat down at my computer and got to work. As a software engineer specializing in IoT systems, I had designed many remote monitoring and control systems over the years. The GPS trackers I had installed on my boat were just the beginning. I had legitimate access to the HOA system backups, since I'd been authorized to develop a community alert system after a series of break-ins the previous summer. The board, including Patricia, had approved my access, never expecting I would use it to investigate them. Using this access, I discovered emails between Patricia and Rodriguez detailing not only the sale of my boat, but also the exchange of a stolen Renaissance painting valued at over $3 million that had been taken from a European museum years ago. The emails were careful, using coded language, but clear enough once you knew what to look for. They referred to the painting as the Italian retirement package and included details about its provenance that matched a stolen artwork I was able to identify through online research. A lesser-known Caravaggio that had disappeared from a small museum in Florence 8 years earlier. This was much bigger than my boat now. I immediately forwarded this information to Agent Chen, who finally seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. Rodriguez must have brought the painting with him, he said when he called me back, his voice tense with excitement. We've been looking for that piece for years. It could be our chance to catch him with solid evidence. I could hear him typing rapidly as we spoke, presumably alerting his team. The FBI began mobilizing, but they were still hours away from being ready to move. We're expediting everything, Chen assured me, but these operations take time to coordinate safely. Meanwhile, Patricia had discovered the GPS tracker I'd installed on the boat and removed it, not realizing I had installed a backup device hidden in the navigation system. I could see from the tracking data that the boat was being moved from the community marina toward the south end of the lake, where private docks line the shore. They were making their move early, probably spooked by something. Perhaps the community meeting or Jenny's confession had made Patricia nervous. I contacted Tom and told him what was happening. Despite Agent Chen's warnings, we decided to follow at a distance to keep eyes on the situation until the FBI could arrive. We took Tom's weathered pickup truck, parking it on a service road that overlooked the section of shoreline where my boat's tracker showed it was heading. Through binoculars, we could see a large man with thinning hair directing Patricia's lackey as he piloted my boat toward a secluded cove where a black Mercedes van was waiting. The man matched the description of Rodriguez from the file Tom had shown me. Middle-aged, heavy-set with slicked-back hair and the confident posture of someone used to giving orders. That's definitely him, Tom whispered, lowering his binoculars. Miguel Rodriguez. He was a person of interest in at least 3 of my old cases, but we could never make anything stick, slippery as an eel. We watched as Rodriguez paced beside the van, checking his watch nervously. Patricia's car pulled up, and she stepped out, clutching a thin rectangular package wrapped in cloth, presumably the painting. I called Agent Chen to update him on the location, and he promised they were en route, but still at least 30 minutes away. Do not engage, Mike. These people could be dangerous, he warned again, the sound of sirens faintly audible in the background of the call. But as I watched Patricia approach the dock where my boat had just been moored, I realized we were about to lose our window of opportunity. Rodriguez looked skittish, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. That's when I remembered the remote access system I had installed on my boat. As a software engineer with a specialty in IoT devices, I had created a custom system that allowed me to control various electronic functions on the boat remotely. Originally designed so I could check battery levels and turn on climate control before arriving for a day on the water, the system had its own cellular connection and backup power supply, making it independent of the boat's main electrical system, a feature I'd added after once finding myself with a dead battery miles from shore. I pulled out my laptop, connected to a mobile hotspot, and accessed the system. The interface was simple, a dashboard I had designed myself with toggles for various functions. With a few keystrokes, I could control everything from the navigation lights to the bilge pumps. But what I needed now was a distraction, something to disrupt the transaction without putting anyone in danger. or tipping them off to FBI involvement. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, watching as my fingers flew across the keyboard. "Creating a diversion," I replied, a plan forming in my mind. "If we can delay them just long enough for the FBI to arrive, we can catch them all red-handed with both my boat and the stolen artwork." Agent Chen and I sat in his unmarked FBI vehicle, watching Patricia supervise her lackey piloting my boat to the secluded meeting spot. Rodriguez waited by his van, nervously glancing over his shoulder. The GPS tracker showed they were heading toward the middle of the lake, rather than the agreed meeting point. "She knows we're watching," Agent Chen said with frustration. I just smiled. "No, she doesn't know about Plan B." I opened my laptop and accessed my boat's custom control system. With a few keystrokes, I activated the emergency alarm. Instantly, the boat's horn began blaring continuously, while all navigation lights flashed in a strobe pattern. Through my binoculars, I could see Patricia's man frantically trying to shut it off while she screamed at him, her face contorted with panic. "Remote access," I explained to Chen. "I designed the system myself." "They can't shut it off without the master code." Rodriguez immediately assumed it was a police operation. He jumped into his van and sped away, directly into the FBI tactical team, blocking the only exit. Agents swarmed the van, finding documentation for the illegal boat sale and the stolen Renaissance painting worth over $3 million, along with several other artifacts on international watch lists. And Patricia tried to escape as her man brought the still blaring boat to shore. She ran toward her Mercedes, clutching a USB drive containing evidence. With another command on my laptop, I remotely locked her car doors, another benefit of my IoT expertise. She was trapped until FBI agents surrounded her vehicle. The look on Patricia's face when agents approached with guns drawn was unforgettable. Shock, transitioning to disbelief, and finally defeat. They recovered the USB drive containing falsified HOA documents, financial records of illegal sales, and communications with buyers of stolen goods. They also found $50,000 cash in her purse, Rodriguez's deposit for my boat and painting. As agents led Patricia away in handcuffs, she caught my eye. Her mask slipped completely, revealing not the confident bully, but a desperate, cornered woman. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "This goes higher than you can imagine." Patricia desperately blamed everything on the HOA board, and Stephen claiming she was just following protocols. "I'm the victim here," she shouted. But Jenny had already provided agents with comprehensive evidence of Patricia's fraudulent activities spanning years. Stephen was arrested at home later, caught shredding documents. He immediately began negotiating with prosecutors, offering evidence against Patricia for leniency. Agent Chen later told me they'd been investigating Patricia peripherally, but never had enough evidence until I came along. "Your boat led us to Rodriguez, and Rodriguez led us to one of the biggest art recovery operations in FBI history. That painting alone is worth millions, but the collection in his warehouse is valued at over $30 million. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Patricia faced multiple charges: fraud, money laundering, trafficking in stolen goods, and theft. Rodriguez was taken into custody, awaiting extradition to Europe for art theft. My boat was returned immediately, though it took hours to disable the alarms I'd triggered. As I cleaned it the next day, removing Patricia's fingerprints from its glossy surface, I felt a profound sense of closure. The HOA was reorganized with Tom as interim president, committed to transparency and fairness. His first act was to nullify all of Patricia's emergency regulations and create a system requiring multiple approvals for any new rules. Stephen Brooks, the corrupt attorney, lost his license to practice law and faced his own set of charges for conspiracy and document fraud. Jenny was promoted to HOA executive director, helping to implement new safeguards against abuse of power. "I should have spoken up sooner," Jenny told me tearfully at the first post-Patricia HOA meeting. "I was so afraid of losing my job, of not being able to support my family. I didn't realize how many people she was hurting." I assured her that coming forward when she did had made all the difference. Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless from the beginning. It's about finding your voice when it matters most. As for me, I became something of a neighborhood hero. I used my technical skills to set up a community alert system to prevent future Karens from abusing their positions. My experience as a software engineer with hardware knowledge had proven more valuable than I ever imagined in taking down a criminal enterprise operating right in my backyard. Several neighbors approached me about installing similar systems in their homes, and I even received job offers from security firms impressed by my improvised boat alarm system. 6 months later, I took my boat out on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, enjoying the peace and quiet that had finally returned to Lakeside Estates. The water was calm, reflecting the cloudless blue sky like a mirror. I cut the engine in the middle of the lake, letting the boat drift gently as I popped open a cold beer. A simple pleasure that now felt like a profound victory. As I drifted near a small cove, I noticed a woman in a kayak waving to me. It was Jamie, a new neighbor who had moved in after the Patricia scandal, as everyone now called it. She had purchased one of the homes that had been seized from Patricia's assets, a lovely lakefront property that had previously belonged to one of Patricia's shell companies. Jamie was in her mid-30s, a marine biologist who had moved to Tampa for a research position at the university. "Nice boat," she called out as she paddled closer. "Mind if I come aboard?" I brought extra beer. She held up a small cooler with a grin that made my heart skip a beat. We struck up a conversation that led to dinner, which led to more dinners, and soon we were spending most weekends together on the water. Patricia was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for information about other smuggling operations. Her assets were seized to compensate her victims, including several former residents who had moved away after being targeted by her schemes. Rodriguez was extradited to Europe to face charges for art theft. Tom became the official HOA president, implementing numerous positive changes for the community, including a transparent financial system and strict limits on the board's power to impose penalties. One day, I received an email from Agent Chen informing me that thanks to the evidence from our case, the FBI had broken up the entire smuggling ring Rodriguez had been part of. They recovered over $30 million in stolen artwork and artifacts, some of which had been missing for decades. Museums across Europe held special exhibitions showcasing the recovered treasures, and I received a personal thank you note from the director of the Florence Museum, where the Caravaggio had been stolen from. In a strange twist of fate, I received a package from prison, a letter of apology from Patricia, along with keys to a small beach house in the Keys that she had hidden from the FBI. The letter was unexpected, a jumble of remorse and self-justification that revealed more about her character than perhaps she intended. "I never meant for things to go this far," she wrote. "It started with just one opportunity, then another. And before I knew it, I couldn't stop. The power became addictive. I passed the keys along to Linda, her daughter, telling her she deserved a fresh start away from her mother's shadow. Linda was grateful, tears in her eyes as she thanked me for being kind, despite everything her mother had done. She wasn't always like this," Linda confided. "After Dad died, something in her broke. Money and control became everything. It was a reminder that even the worst villains in our lives are still human, shaped by their own tragedies and flaws. So there you have it, my friends. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds its way to those who deserve it." Patricia is now enjoying an extended stay in federal prison, and I'm enjoying peaceful weekend boat rides, sometimes with Jamie by my side. It turns out there's a lesson behind every Karen, and mine was never underestimate a software engineer with too much free time and a boat to reclaim. If you like this story, hit like, subscribe, and share it with anyone dealing with a Karen in their life. And remember, sometimes the sweetest victory isn't when you get even. It's when you sit back and let karma do its work. But if karma needs a little help from the FBI, well, I'm not judging. Thanks for watching HOA Unleashed. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.